One of the things that hasn't really gotten a lot of press today because of the budget reconciliation bill going through the Senate is that today is the anniversary of the Supreme Court case, Donald J. Trump versus United States. And I'm going to submit that this is, as I said at the time, the most important case in American history, but it's certainly the case that has put us where we are now. So, what was that case? It was the case in which the Supreme Court overthrew the central tenet of American history and the American government, that no man is above the law. And what it said in Donald J. Trump v. United States is that the President of the United States has absolute immunity, cannot be prosecuted for crimes committed as part of his official acts, and that he should be given presumed immunity for other acts that are not explicitly defined as part of the presidential roster of things that a president can do in the Constitution. So what that did is that it set up the idea that a president, in this case, President Donald Trump, because there was a kind of a caveat, a warning in that decision that said, because we don't know what official acts are, the Supreme Court is what's going to get to decide what official acts are. So a lot of people are like, well, why doesn't just President Joe Biden take that out for a spin? Well, first of all, because he wouldn't. But second of all, because the Supreme Court almost certainly would have slapped down anything Biden tried to do, because they had set this up for Trump with the idea that they were going to put a green stamp on anything that Trump wanted to do and not for anybody else. But what they said is that they needed to give a president the opportunity to take bold and unhesitating action to make unpopular decisions, which they argued, although no president had ever asked for immunity before or even conceived of having immunity. You certainly didn't see that from somebody like Richard Nixon. They said that the president needed that in order to do unpopular things, even though, as I say, nobody had ever asked for it or even presumed that they could get it before, but they did that. All right, so if you start from that premise, exactly a year ago today, I still remember sitting here shell-shocked because it was so contrary to everything that the United States has ever stood for. What has come from that? Well, first, what came from that was the fact that the Supreme Court delayed that decision as late as it possibly could. You probably don't remember all the gyrations that the different prosecutors went through to try and get the Supreme Court to put forward a decision on Trump's challenges to the cases against him in time for him actually to go to trial. But they kept delaying and kept delaying and kept delaying. And this decision that they handed down on the last day of court. They did the last possible time they could. So what that meant was that they essentially ran out the clock, meaning that Trump would not go to trial in the two federal criminal cases against him. One for retaining classified documents when he left the Oval Office. And there were 32 counts in that case of willfully retaining documents. And there were also some other charges as well that had that a grand jury had come forward with. But also that he would not go forward to trial on his attempt to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. That would not happen before the 2024 election in which he was running. So what came from that was that Trump won the 2024 election. And as soon as he won the election, in part by cobbling together, as I said, all these different constituencies with promises that contradicted each other, what happened as soon as he took office, the minute that he took office, was he began to break the law. The very first thing that the Trump administration did when Trump took office was to do what is called impoundment. That is refusing to disperse the monies that Congress has appropriated for something that Congress thinks is important. Now, it's critically important to remember that our Constitution sets up the Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate as the only body that can make laws. We elect them. They are our representatives, and they're the ones who make the laws for us. The president is charged with faithfully executing those laws. But what the Trump administration has argued is that if Trump doesn't like a law, he can simply not spend the money for it. And that is illegal constitutionally, but I mean, it's unconstitutional. But there's also a law that Congress passed when Nixon tried that during his term. And the Congress passed a law in 1974 called the Impoundment Control Act, which says, dude, you can't do it. That's illegal. That is explicitly illegal. Well, the Trump administration, pushed by the director of the Office of Management and Budget, a man named Russell Vought, who was a key architect of Project 2025, has said, we don't think it's unconstitutional and we don't think it's illegal, so we're going to go ahead and do it anyway. So as soon as Trump took office, he began to impound funds that Congress had appropriated to keep the country running, to do things like fund cancer research and to fund the National Institutes of Health and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and to fund, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I love that one, to fund the different things that make our country go. And that's something that Trump has insisted from the beginning he doesn't have to do. So today you are seeing that play out, for example, in the fact that today Trump has said he will not, this being the last day of certain fiscal years of a number of educational fiscal years, that he will not disperse, and I've got the number written down here and I'm not seeing it. I think it's $6 billion for educational grants that have already been granted and that people are counting on for the K through 12 schools going forward, that he's simply going to impound them, that he's not going to disperse them, despite the fact, again, that is unconstitutional and illegal. So you got from the very beginning the idea that this president was simply going to do whatever he wanted with this legal decision behind him. And you saw that as well in the Department of Government Efficiency, which was never really a legal agency as near as I could tell. And they were very careful to make it unclear who was in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency, even though Trump repeatedly referred to billionaire Elon Musk as the person in charge of it. In court, the administration maintained that there were different people who were in charge of it, that Musk was only an advisor, that there was somebody else who was in charge of it. And they've played this shell game, which has made it really, really difficult for people to figure out whom to charge with the kinds of illegal actions that the Department of Government Efficiency took. You've also seen the overturning or the ignorance of court orders about things like not sending the planes to El Salvador with migrants on them for a detention in a third country. Again, something a court order said you may not do, they did it anyway. And now we're in this mess of having these poor men in CICOT, the notorious terrorist prison in El Salvador, because they're already out of U.S. soil, and Trump and his people sort of doing, again, a shell game of, well, the president can do whatever he wants with foreign affairs. Now this is a foreign affair, and so you can't get your hands on these people. So from the very beginning of his administration, Trump made it clear he was going to construct a government that reflected the interests of the people who elected him. And that would be, of course, Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency. It would be the people behind Project 2025, the Christian nationalists who are trying to impose Christianity on the country. And it would be those people who wanted to get rid of business regulation. So who are trying to tear down the US government because they don't want business regulation. So you've seen this mix of things since he took office. But you've also seen something else, and that is the destruction of the rule of law. Because the way that you have the rule of law in this country is for people like the Department of Justice to uphold the rule of law. And what Trump did as soon as he was put into office was to put his own cronies into crucial positions in the American government, including at the Department of Justice, where Attorney General Pam Bondi is using that position, as are a number of the U.S. attorneys, to attack Trump's political enemies and to go after his political enemies and to make it very clear that they are not going to pursue anything that Trump or his people do that is contrary to the rule of law. So again, here you've seen the different aspects of the Department of Justice going after Democratic politicians, for example, charging a Democratic politician in New Jersey, trying to go after Democratic politicians for one thing or another. And now today, President Donald Trump has suggested that he will arrest and deport the young man who was just elected the Democratic candidate for mayor of New York, saying that we don't need people like him here. He is a naturalized citizen. And Trump suggesting he will strip Mamdani's citizenship and send him out of the country. So all of that I am giving you as a setup for what has happened today in the United States of America. And that is the Senate passed that budget reconciliation bill that Trump has demanded. This is a really important touchstone moment for what is happening in this country under this administration. This is an enormously unpopular bill. It's very difficult to think of another measure in our history that deals exclusively, not exclusively, but deals largely with economics that has ever been this unpopular. I came up with the 1890 tariff bill, the McKinley tariff bill, but quite literally, I cannot think of another economic-based bill. I can think of the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, and before that, the Compromise of 1850. Those were both enormously unpopular bills. But this one is theoretically economically based, and maybe there are other ones out there, but the only one that I can think of is the 1890 McKinley tariff that was this unpopular. This is crazy unpopular. People really, really, really hate this bill. And yet, it has passed both the House and the Senate. And that says, I think, a lot of things. First of all, the bill cuts taxes for the very wealthiest Americans quite significantly. It will dramatically move money upward from the poorest Americans to the richest Americans. In order partly to offset the cost of those tax cuts, it will dramatically slash the programs that poorer Americans rely on, things like Medicaid and the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. It will also hurt the United States' attempt to address our energy needs with something other than fossil fuels, and will almost certainly send energy prices skyrocketing and destabilize our energy markets. That combination of things is, again, enormously unpopular and says, I think, the degree to which Trump and his cronies simply intend to create a world in which the rich people get everything. So why would both the House and the Senate pass it? Now, a certain number of people in the House especially are just MAGA Republicans. They want Trump to be a dictator. They want whatever he wants. They're Christian nationalists. They hate the libs, and they're willing to pass anything. But the fact it passed the Senate, when quite literally Tom Tillis, a Republican of North Carolina, has said he will not run for re-election based on this bill, says something about the pressure that a president who is unrestrained by the rule of law can bring to our lawmaking. That is, he threatened Tillis with a primary, that he was going to interfere in the choices of North Carolinians to choose their senator in order to make sure that whoever gets into that position will do what Trump wants. And Tillis, who is a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, finally said enough is enough, because I will not cut the kinds of programs that North Carolinians rely on in order to put more money in the pockets of people like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. And the thing about those cuts that's important to remember is it doesn't just cut the benefits of people who rely on Medicaid. You need to remember that many of our nursing homes and hospitals depend on that money from Medicaid, and those tend to be concentrated in rural areas. So the analysts of this bill say that we're going to lose a lot of rural hospitals. Similarly, SNAP benefits don't simply benefit the people who rely on them. They benefit those markets, again, especially in rural areas that depend on SNAP benefits in order for them to survive. So there's going to be a huge ripple effect through especially rural America from the possible passage of this bill.